32, I believe. Let's see where
Rudy's 23rd.
Rudy is 23rd right now, and Todd is, of course, in 14th currently.
And so both players who are on their way to try to get into that 16-player Players Championship at the end of the year. And here they get to play an elimination match. Winner of it will be one, maybe two wins from top 8, but the loser of it will be out of contention for the day.
Absolutely. Rudy's decided to stick with his trusty Esper Deathblade, a deck that he's been playing for several years, or a couple years at this point. Did very well at Grand Prix DC, has a couple of Legacy Open top 8s under his belt. Todd has decided to go with Reanimator today, which is actually a popular choice among well, not just recently, but also among the SCG crowd, as CVM is also running it.
Yeah, the Roanoke contingent has chosen the deck a lot today.
Brad decided to stick with his trusty Sneak and Show, but Todd and CVM and a couple of the other Roanokers decided that they were going to go with Reanimator. As we see, Rudy is on the draw with the Thoughtseize, which means that Todd gets to respond with an Entomb to get Gristlebrand into the graveyard.
Yeah, this is a matchup we actually saw last round. It was pretty difficult for Jim Davis, as we saw Van Meter was able to take it down. Maybe Rudy will have some better luck. He is playing Deathblade, which, thanks to Deathrite Shaman, has more interaction than you would expect from the Stoneblade deck that Jim Davis was running.
Absolutely. He does have 4 Deathrite Shaman. Todd, by the way, dazes the Thoughtseize after entombing, and then uses a Lotus Petal to be able to cast Entomb, or I'm sorry, Exhume, which brings back Gristlebrand, which immediately draws 7 cards for Todd as he goes down to 13.
Yeah, this is
12,
can be one of those runaway games, especially when Reanimator's on the play. Rudy has very few cards that can interact this early. You know, even Deathrite Shaman doesn't interact this early. It would still be summoning sick. You see Rudy had the Deathrite Shaman, no time to play and untap with it. Todd had one of those, a pretty good, and one of the God draw hands, I suppose, for Reanimator, when they have the turn two kill with the counterspell backup.
With the day's backup to take out the Thoughtseize, as we see. True Name Nemesis is not very good in this matchup. This is really the reason why Reanimator is being played right now, is because True Name Nemesis decks are sort of taking over the format, and Reanimator is very good against them. Todd also sees Vendilion Click, Jace the Mind Sculptor, and Deathrite Shaman. Probably going to take the Deathrite here, as Rudy is just probably going to have to top deck a 2-drop or a 1-drop or a 2-drop to stay in this game.
Yeah, I mean, well, the question is whether or not Todd has found a Force of Will in those 7 cards he drew. If he did, Rudy really is out of answers, but he's going to put Todd to the test. He did draw Swords to Plowshares.
And so during, I believe this is going to be during Todd's upkeep?
Yeah,
no,
let's Todd draw a card.
Let's Todd draw a card. Might be waiting for another activation from Gristlebrand before seeing what happens. And so in combat, he's going to use Swords to Plowshares, targeting the demon there. By the way, Todd discarded Iona, Shield of Emeria during his discard step.
Yeah, and that's one of the scary things about Emrakul, is even in the situation that this Swords resolves, as it looks like it might, Todd has drawn 14 cards. And with that Iona in the yard, it is almost certain that this, even if when Gristlebrand is removed, Todd will follow up with Iona.
You know, it doesn't look like he drew a whole lot of black spells in those 14 cards, as Todd is at 3. No pressure, of course, from the Esper.
No Force of Will, no Reanimate.
There's the
Force of Will. So he finally, with that Brainstorm, hits Force of Will. And this is actually really punishing for Rudy, because Todd had to draw 7 into the Brainstorm for the Force of Will. Had Rudy swords on his own turn, Todd would not have found the Force of Will. Gristlebrand would be in exile, and Rudy would still be in the game.
Yep, I think that he was fearing another free counterspell in Todd's. I mean, to be fair, the likelihood of a Force of Will not being in the top 14 and then being in the next
top 7, yeah, and the next 3 is very low.
It's very unlikely.
But it did hit this game, you know? And
it did. And so Todd counters, drops Rudy to 13. Todd goes back up to 9. He's drawn in excess of, I would say, almost 20 cards this game between Brainstorms, Draw Steps, and Gristlebrand activations.
Well, after Gristlebrand comes down on turn 2, the window for Rudy is pretty small where he can interact. He actually had really an amazing hand against Reanimator. You think about it, you know, Swords to Plowshares, Deathrite Shaman, Thoughtseize, those are great tools. They all cost 1. They're all very effective. But nonetheless, Todd, you know, the window was small. Rudy had an opening, but he didn't hit in it. And it looks, you know, at this point, it'll be pretty unlikely that Rudy can play anything relevant.
Todd is going to snag the Vendilion Click with a Thoughtseize, falling back down to 7. Again, Esper Deathblade's not going to be able to threaten the life total without creatures on the board. And all he has left now is a Jace and a True Name Nemesis, which isn't going to affect Todd's ample hand size at this point, deciding what he's going to keep here before discard step.
That was actually a bit of a decision from Todd. Normally you'd auto Thoughtseize there, but the fact that it put Todd from 9 to 7 meant he lost a Gristlebrand activation, so that was actually a pretty expensive Thoughtseize. If he had another Force of Will in his hand, it would not be as expensive, but now Rudy does have leeway to resolve whatever he wants to. Fortunately for Todd, I mean, it's a true name Nemesis.
Yeah.
That's not really going to be a card that will have a high enough impact.
Not only can it not stand in front of a Griselbrand while it's attacking, but it doesn't have an impact the turn that it comes into play.
Yeah, it doesn't mean it can't race the Griselbrand. You know, it doesn't. Todd can ignore this card.
Yeah, a turn 2 Griselbrand is tough for most decks to beat, particularly when Thought Seizes are coming in from every angle.
Yeah.
So Todd's probably going to be able to just either, even if Rudy top decks a land, he may be able to find another Force Will, although Todd did use 2 Force Wills already.
So a little bit of a story going into this matchup. You see Rudy pretty much going to drop game 1 to Todd here. Yesterday, Rudy was commenting, or was talking with him about his legacy deck choice. He was commenting on the prevalence of graveyard decks over the last 2 weeks, and he said he was going to metagame it, and he had been practicing blue-white miracles with main deck Blood Moon for this tournament.
Yeah.
He said, great graveyard hate. He said, no one's playing basics now. He's going to Blood Moon people. He's going to rest in peace people. We actually talked about the deck list. Got here in round 3, talked to him. He said he got cold feet and switched back to his standby.
Yeah.
He said just minutes before the tournament, went back. He got the registration sheet with him. He has both 60s with him, actually, and decided for Deathblade.
It's not too surprising because Rudy is so comfortable with this deck. He's also doing quite well, remember? He's at 5-1, so it's not like he made a poor choice. Unfortunately, this round, he's up against a nightmare matchup. Todd just entombed for Iona, and probably will be able to use a reanimation spell if he so chooses.
Yeah, it's this matchup where he might be like, man, I wish I was playing Miracles, you know?
Right.
To be fair, though, when Todd has on the play a turn 2 Griselbrand with counterspell, I'm not sure Miracles...
Not sure Miracles can do much about it either, is the thing. So Todd goes up to 14. He does have the reanimate in hand. Iona costs 9, so he will fall to 5 life if he chooses Iona Shield of Emeria. Right. Iona is the Zendikar legend, I believe.
She is from Zendikar. She's a mythic rare. Yep.
And so when she enters the battlefield, Todd chooses a color, and Rudy can't play spells of that color. Almost certainly going to name blue, as he's seen the Jace. Although, hey, there's another Swords. Doesn't really do it here because he's facing down 2 7/7 flyers.
He can get rid of one of them, but he'll still take the remaining 7.
It's the second 7/7 flyer that gets you, is the thing.
Sure, absolutely.
As we see Todd take game 1 here of this round 7 legacy feature match, and we're going to move to the sideboards. I'm going to start with Todd's sideboard because I really like this card. This card says Not of This World. Have you guys discussed this one already?
All right, well, this was not only is it not of this world, but it was not in Chris Van Meter's sideboard.
Oh, okay.
So this is Todd going out on his own.
I want to get this card image up on the screen so that the folks at home can see this one. This is a Rise of the Eldrazi instant uncommon that I've seen used in a couple Reanimator decks and a couple Sneak and Show decks here and there. Basically anything that's trying to cheat stuff into play.
Yeah, the spell, first of all, its name's an adjective, which is just weird.
Right.
But beyond that, it costs 7 or really costs 0.
Right. Well, the Eldrazi were sort of poetic like that. They have All Is Dust and you know, things like that.
Yeah, they have very archaic names.
Not
they're
of This
quite
World
old.
serves a very specific purpose. It's a colorless, free counter spell.
Right.
When you have a spell on the stack targeting your reanimated creature.
So it's basically a turn aside that costs 0 which only protects large creatures.
Right. So its converted mana cost is 7, but it costs 7 less than if you have a creature with power 7 or more on the battlefield and it counters a spell targeting a creature you control.
Right.
And so Not of This World serves a very specific purpose. It's to counter Swords to Plowshares and things like that that are targeting your giant Griselbrands and Ionas.
Yeah, well, and so it's a pretty narrow card, but it's very interesting here, especially it's another Force of Will when you hit Griselbrand, when Griselbrand comes into play.
I also want to mention that I forgot a very important aspect of this card. Counter target spell or ability.
Right.
That targets a permanent you control. This also can counter a Caracas activation.
Right.
I forgot about that
part. It can counter Caracas. Yeah. It is a catch-all for your resolved Griselbrand.
So the rest of Todd's sideboard are 2 Show and Tells and 2 City of Traders. That's fairly standard at this point to be playing against Miracles when they bring in either Rest in Peace or Grafdigger's Cage, or both sometimes. you can bring in the Show and Tell City of Traders plan to just avoid the graveyard entirely. He's also got Chain of Vapor, Thoughtseize, access to Pike Needle, Coffin Purge, a Flusterstorm, a Spell Pierce, and 1 copy of Ashen Rider. The Ashen Rider is to be able to take care of tough-to-deal-with permanents like Ensnaring Bridge.
So he has some advantages here. He certainly will go on the Show and Tell plan. They typically do, especially against decks that can sideboard heavily against them. There are some things different than the list that Chris Van Meer's playing. For example, he doesn't have Massacre, so he can't take out Meddling Mages. That said, we'll move on to Rudy's sideboard. Rudy has no Meddling Mages for the matchup, so this figures to be pretty strong for Todd. What Rudy does have is a lot more just incidental hate cards. He has 3 Surgical Extractions, and even though he's aware that Todd will probably go in the Show and Tell plan, he will still board them in. They're just too good not to play. His 4th Force of Will was in the sideboard. He'll probably bring that back. He also has some Swan Song, which he could be using here. That's a pretty decent counter spell in the matchup.
That'll counter the Thoughtseize, which is very, or I'm sorry, not the Thoughtseize. Well, it can, of course, but mostly the Show and Tell.
I mean, I think what I really like about it is that it costs 1.
Yes.
There's Reanimator, as we saw there, can be so fast that you just want to make sure you have interaction as early as possible.
He's also got some fun stuff to put into play should Show and Tells resolve. He's got Venser Shaper Savant, which will be able to either bounce the spell or bounce whatever Todd puts into play. He's got an Oblivion Ring, which has the trigger to be able to take out whatever Todd puts into play. And, hey, should Todd, last comes to last, he needs to Show and Tell in a Gristlebrand, Rudy can put in his 1 Notion Thief.
I would be shocked if Rudy boards it. That'd be great.
Now,
That'd be
it's
great.
almost never happened. However, last week, Joe Bernal put in a Notion Thief off of a Show and Tell activation, and his opponent put in a Gristlebrand. So that was awkward for a couple of turns until for a turn until his opponent top decked the 1 Pyroblast that he needed.
I was gonna say, I bet the story's gonna end with Gristlebrand still drawing 7, and then it did.
It did.
Tragic.
It was the 1-outer. Shout out to Joe Bernal, of course, for that one. As we move on to game 2, Rudy will be on the play. He did indeed bring in the Swan Songs. He is going to elect to keep, it looks like, and using a Marsh Flats.
Yeah, a lot of disruption here. We see a turn 1 Deathrite Shaman from Rudy. Outside of that, it's just hate card, hate card, hate card. He has Deathrite Shaman. In addition to that, it's a Swan Song. It's a Pithing Needle. He has a lot of disruption, and he's just going to sit back, eat Todd's graveyard, drain Todd's life total.
Yep, the best offense is a good defense in this case, whereas Todd has ample mana. He's got 3 lands. He's also got a Show and Tell with a Gristlebrand, a Force of Will with no other blue card, and also an Entomb. Now, typically they side out 2 Entombs and 2 of each of the reanimation spells to be able to make room for the Show and Tell package so that they're less dependent on the graveyard, but there are still 2 copies of each of those, as I confuse them sometimes. Todd finds a 2nd blue card, which is another copy of Force of Will, and he's going to use it to cast Thoughtseize.
All right. Thoughtseize, so we see another Deathrite Shaman, a Swan Song, a Brainstorm, and a Pithing Needle. Todd will get his choice of those cards. And Todd's just sculpting right now. You saw that his hand, as you said, Gristlebrand, Show and Tell, Force of Will. The only thing he's really missing is another blue card for the Force of Will.
He found the 2nd Force of Will on top, so he's got 2 forces right now.
So he has 2 forces already.
So he has the Force of Will backup for the turn 3 Show and Tell.
I mean, he may just take Pithing Needle. That's the one card that can get him. If Rudy just Jedi's Pithing Needle naming Gristlebrand, you know, that's something. If he were to cast Show and Tell, that's a card that Rudy could sneak in off Show and Tell that stops the Gristlebrand.
Yep, and I think that that's pretty much the only reason for the Pithing Needle is to name Gristlebrand.
Right, and his hand, you know, there's 1 counterspell to fight through. There's a Swan Song. So Todd's got to be wary of Swan Song because if Rudy is able to find a 2nd counterspell before Todd hits 3 mana, then Todd's game plan no longer works.
He's going to take the Brainstorm. I think that that's the right choice. Like, Gristlebrand is still a 7/7 flying lifelinking flyer that Rudy's deck has a very difficult time dealing with.
Even if it's needled, Rudy still has to find the Swords to Plowshares for it.
And it's still attacking for 7 and still gaining Todd 7 life. And that's still giving Todd lots of extra turns, even though he's not drawing those cards immediately.
Yeah, so I think Rudy's just going to develop his game plan further here. It looks like he's going for a 2nd Deathrite Shaman. Really what he wants to do is sit behind a wall of control and permission and use his end step to win the game. Deathrite Shamans are great sources of mana, so they're really good at winning counter wars. They also are good at killing people on end steps. Like, they're one of the better weapons that Deathblade can have here.
So Rudy leaves up the Deathrite Shaman to be able to cast the Swan Song should he so need to. He can also take out either a sorcery or a creature with the Bayou, so he's got all 3 activations of Deathrite Shaman available to him. Todd just plays land and passes, so Rudy is going to shock Todd by removing the Thoughtseize.
Let's look at Todd's draw for the turn, though. It is not from here, you could say.
That card is not from here.
Yeah.
So he drew the Knot of this World, which will be able to protect the Gristlebrand should a Swords to Plowshares find its way off the top.
Yeah.
And here comes the Pithing Needle. We'll find out what it names.
I think Todd's going to just beat him up with a 7/7 here. Not ignore its ability.
I think that's exactly what's going to happen is Rudy drops the Pithing Needle, naming Gristlebrand. Todd's land got wastelanded, so he's going to have to wait a minute. Uh-oh.
And now
things are going to be a little more interesting.
Yeah, things are going to be harder
Here's another
for Todd.
interesting wrinkle. We now have Liliana of the Veil in Rudy's hand. He has 2 copies, does Rudy. And so he's got Liliana and Swan Song with the requisite mana to cast both.
Well, what he was able to do here with that Wasteland last turn is he was able to keep Todd off show and tell for a really relevant turn. That gave him the opportunity to draw Liliana, and when you have cards that just get a free activation every turn, like Deathrite Shaman, Wasteland becomes really powerful because Wasteland, even if you're just time walking yourself to time walk your opponent, you're just slowing down the game, you get another free activation off those Deathrites.
Yep.
And you see Todd's life total's at 14. Rudy may just be able to chip him away.
So he's going to target the Liliana with a Force of Will, and it looks like this is going to get Swan Songed.
Yeah, unfortunately for Todd, he had to pitch Force to Force, and that leaves Todd in an awkward spot. We'll see if Rudy Swan Song's here. He's going to go ahead and Swan Song the Force. He could alternatively just Swan Song the Show and Tell. Now Show and Tell's going to actually get to resolve here.
Now here's a fun wrinkle. Liliana's going to tick up to 4. This bird is going to be able to actually knock it back down to 2. So this bird token from the Swan Song is going to be able to keep this Liliana in check when it's typically not that relevant.
It is possible that the bird will save the Gristlebrand.
The bird is going to be relevant here.
The thing is when the worst part is when Todd Show and Tells the Gristlebrand into play, Liliana can no longer edict the Gristlebrand because of a bird.
Yep, the bird token not only prevents the edict effect from taking it out, it also is going to attack for 2 next turn.
Because of the bird token, it would have been better for Rudy to let Liliana get countered and save Swan Song for Show and Tell.
As it turns out, but having Liliana on the board is extremely powerful against Reanimator in general. He doesn't happen to know that Todd has already amassed the 1-2 punch.
It's a specific situation. I think Rudy needs to respect it, however. Like, Swan Song is good against whatever spell Todd uses to make a monster. And so you want to save the counter for that because the Liliana minus doesn't cut it here because you're giving him a 2-2.
As we see, Entomb was choosing between Ashen Rider and Elish Norn. Ashen Rider or Elish Norn, Todd decides to go with the Elish Norn to be able to wipe the board should it come into play. He thinks that the 2 Deathrite Shamans are going to be more relevant than the Liliana of the Veil in this game.
Yeah, well, he's not too worried about the Liliana. The bird gives him the protection he needs. If I'm Todd, I don't have great confidence that this Elish Norn is going to matter. What it will do is on 1 turn, Rudy will have to eat the Elish Norn instead of eating a spell, so it might buy me a turn if I'm Todd.
Now, did we misread his hand? It doesn't look like he has a Gristlebrand in hand.
It's possible? Okay, well, if he does not...
It doesn't look like he does.
All right, okay, well, in that situation... Now Todd's in a little bit of a tougher spot.
Yeah,
okay,
Todd's
it may
in a
have been
significantly tougher
spot. I think it was an Entomb instead of a Gristlebrand.
It was an Entomb instead of a Gristlebrand. I thought he had both, but...
Well, that will change
That changes things incredibly as Todd draws another land.
And he has to not play land. He needs to continue to have fodder there for the Liliana. Todd will, his whole graveyard getting eaten.
Yep. As we see the Entomb leaves, Todd falls to 11. Deathrite Shamans are able to eat Todd alive. I'm not sure how many sorceries and instants are left in there.
Yeah. Now, that said, so Rudy's in a great spot. I still think the Swan Song play was aggressive because he didn't know that Todd didn't have the combo.
Right. Now, assuming Todd doesn't have Show and Tell Gristlebrand or Show and Tell Fatty of some kind.
Right.
Which it turns out he didn't. Getting the Liliana in play is a better play. But it's very close.
Only maybe because
it depends
he
on
still
what the
has
top
to
of
resolve
Todd's deck is,
an
I suppose.
Entomb or some sort of spell on the graveyard to get the creature in play. Like, you'd rather be fighting over the Reanimate or the Show and Tell or the Exhume. You don't really want to be fighting over your own Liliana.
So the bird takes down Liliana after a few turns worth of
gets
pecks, but Todd falls to 7 on Deathrite Shaman activations.
It is.
And there's the Force of Will still in the graveyard. We now have a Brainstorm in the graveyard, so Todd will get to have to fall to 3. And Rudy finds plenty of instants and sorceries on top of his deck, as we see a pair of Surgical Extractions, a Swords to Plowshares, and a Brainstorm.
Yeah, well, Todd's running out of outs here. Remember, Gristlebrand can't draw cards. It couldn't anyway because Todd's at 7. The Swords to Plowshares is there for a possible monster that Todd makes, and the Surgicals will be pretty strong. It looks like Rudy has established the lock for long enough. I think there's some justice to the bird taking down the Liliana, since the Swan Song's what let Liliana resolve in the first place.
Sure, but it got to be in play for several turns, which is really the only window that Rudy needed, as Todd finds another piece of counter magic, which isn't really going to take him anywhere just at the end of this game. Todd falls to 3. Rudy has 2 instants and sorceries in his hand, and so he'll be able to use the Deathrite Shaman.
What Rudy's done has been pretty impressive this game. I do want to point out the fact that Todd more or less fizzled this game. Say Rudy did nothing disruptive all game. Todd kept all his cards. Todd would not have been able to win this game. He never found he never had Show and Tell monster or monster in the graveyard plus a reanimation spell. So if Todd was playing, solitaire against a wall, he still wouldn't have won this game.
Absolutely, and we see Rudy takes game 2. So we're going to go back to sideboards, and let's look at them again and reevaluate where we are, knowing what people have brought in. We're pretty sure that Todd brought in the 3rd and 4th Show and Tells. He certainly brought in the Not of This Worlds. And likely that he also brought in Thoughtseize, and we saw that he brought in the Ashen Riders. Do you think that any of that changes? Does he start bringing, does he need the Chain of Vapor, for example, for anything in particular, now that he's seen Pithing Needle?
He has seen Pithing Needle. In general, the Reanimator deck boards in Chain of Vapor in just about every matchup. You mentioned that last round. I would imagine that Chain of Vapor is already in the deck for Todd.
Sure.
Certainly there are enough hateful permanents you can expect out of Rudy. Rest in Peace, Pithing Needle, Oblivion Ring. Granted, some of these he plays, some of these Rudy doesn't. You expect that Rudy plays some number of these cards. And Chain of Vapor is, in general, necessary against these. Could be Meddling Mage. So I imagine that's in his deck. I don't think Todd really re-sideboards here. I think, like I said, his deck didn't work that game.
Sure.
He never actually, it just didn't, he never found the pieces. I think he's more or less still happy with the matchup and would keep it the same.
Rudy has now seen Not of This World. Does anything change for his sideboarding plan?
Well, certainly he's got to be concerned about the card. It's pretty good against him. The question is, does he have anything that he can board against it? He has Oblivion Ring. His cards that he boards in to answer Gristlebrand all get countered by Not of This World. He just has to be aware that Gristlebrands are going to be harder to deal with, I think.
Yeah, Venser returning a Not of This World is not very effective, as you can just recast it for free again. And
you can't show and tell. He can't try to show and tell in Venser. Not of This World will counter.
Yeah.
Right.
And so likely the sideboards are going to remain the same this time with Todd on the play. Rudy had quite the opening hand of defensive spells to be able to fend off anything Todd that could do. He was actually missing a key piece of the puzzle, and so Rudy was able to just finish him off with just Deathrite Shaman activations.
Yeah, and that's what we said. We saw this from Jim Davis last round. Jim was playing Esper Stoneblade, and what he was trying to do was play a Deathrite Shaman, a Stoneforge Mystic, sit behind it, and then do nothing. The problem he was having is that there was never safe to tap out for a 2-mana spell. He would Thoughtseize Chris Van Meter on a hand that looked really innocuous, play a Stoneforge Mystic, and then Chris would make a really powerful play nonetheless. In this matchup, because Deathrite Shaman costs 1 instead of 2, Rudy can do the same plan but do it with a 1-drop, which is much stronger than what Stoneblade does.
So moving into the 3rd game, Rudy, I think, brought in probably double-digit cards from his sideboard. Do you think it's possible that he sided out some number of his namesake creatures, either True Name Nemesis or Stoneforge Mystic?
Well, absolutely. A lot of the cards are just so weak here. Rudy's deck really is a toolbox deck. It has all cards in the main that can work in every matchup. But after board, he just has dead cards all over the place. He has Sword of Fire. He has Umezawa's Jite. That's not really a card here that he can play at all. You know, true name Nemesis, not particularly strong here. There's a lot of things he can board out.
So we're underway here. Todd is going to start out with a cracked fetch land. That is a Marsh Flats for Underground Sea. He has a Lotus Petal. I didn't catch the rest of his hand, but we have the potential for an explosive draw yet again. Rudy is expecting Thoughtseize. We'll see where we're at. Doesn't look like a Thoughtseize. I see a Ponder. Ponder with Daze, Exhume. Looks like Elish Norn, Lotus Petal, and land. And so this Ponder is looking for, well, there's a show and tell. That'll do.
All right.
Elish Norn is one of the, is a good target, don't get me wrong, but it's certainly a lot better if Rudy already has a board presence.
It's an answerable target. Unlike, you know, Gristlebrand, when you make it, oftentimes just wins. Elish Norn is a reactive target. It's good at, you know, taking out Rudy's board, but you know, Rudy can top the Swords to Plowshares and deal with Elish Norn. If he doesn't deal immediately with Gristlebrand, it's done for.
As we see, Rudy decides to play a Flooded Strand and pass.
Yeah.
He has both Deathrite Shaman and Snapcaster Mage, as well as Swan Song in his hand.
Yeah, so he's that worried about a fast start, and I like this from Rudy, is that he could have played Deathrite Shaman, and the next turn had Swan Song up with 3 mana, but instead, he's so worried about the speed of the Reanimator deck that he'd rather only have 2 mana on turn 2, and turn 2 play the Deathrite Shaman just so he can have Swan Song up in case Todd goes for a turn 2 play.
So Todd plays the Lotus Petal before cracking his Polluted Delta. This is going to go get another dual land and probably cast a show and tell.
Yeah, and this is going to be real heads up on Rudy's part for not playing Deathrite Shaman on turn 1.
Todd, I think, has a Daze, though, so it's going to be able to counter.
We saw game 1. If Todd has, you know, the turn 2 kill with Counterspell backup, there's just not much you can do about it.
This isn't necessarily a kill, though. This is just a Elish Norn.
Yeah, this is okay. If this were Gristlebrand,
if this were Gristlebrand, it'd be a much different story.
Yeah, it's just Elish Norn. So Swan Song will get dazed, and
so Rudy wanted the spell to become birds. The bird became confused and flew away.
If I'm Rudy, I'm doing a little bit of a eye roll here.
Yeah.
Oh man, did you really nut draw me twice in the same matchup? But he will be happy to see that it's just Elish Norn.
That it's merely a 4/7 that means Rudy can't play creatures.
Yeah, I mean, he does have a Deathrite Shaman in his hand, so that's, you know, not the best.
Yep, and so he's going to put in the Deathrite Shaman.
That's going to be fun for him.
And there they are, and there goes the Deathrite Shaman. So it was able to take out a creature, which is quite nice for Todd, without a board presence already.
Real big Flame Tongue Kavu.
Yep. Rudy has 4 lands, Brainstorm, Snapcaster Mage now. He's going to need to find an answer, and he finds one in the form of Swords to Plowshares.
No big.
He's also got True Name Nemesis in his deck.
I was going to say he had to find it fast. If he passed back to Todd, Todd could Brainstorm for a Not of This World or, you know, a Force of Will and could maybe lock it out, but Rudy just in time.
I don't think can Not of This World.
Oh, no, it's only 7 power.
It's only 7 power, I believe.
You're absolutely right. Elish Norn is a 4/7. You know, sometimes I assume the Not of This World can hit all of the large creatures in Todd's deck, but some of them are actually from here.
Yeah, I believe, some of them are from here. The Tidespout Tyrant, the Ashen Rider, and the Elish Norn have power less than 7.
They're from here, but that Gristlebrand, I don't know where he came from.
Is Not of This World power?
We'll confirm on that. It's either casting cost or power. I believe it is power.
I think it is power too, but yeah, it is power. Okay. As Brad, or not, geez, I keep doing that. Todd. I keep confusing them. I watch too many Versus videos. Todd is going to Brainstorm here, looking for another way to rebuild his army before Rudy can get any more defenses up. Uses a fetch land to shuffle away some of the chaff. And there is Underground Sea. Presumably, he has another cantrip in his hand, possibly a Thoughtseize.
Yeah, I mean, this whole exchange worked out really well for Rudy in that he didn't lose the game. That said, he hasn't won the game either. We're back to a stalemate. Both players really with empty boards. That favors Rudy, but it's still pretty touch and go.
Yeah, Rudy has True Name Nemesis, Snapcaster Mage, Ponder, land. Todd finds Not of This World, Entomb, land with his Ponder.
Yeah, and I don't think he can keep that hand. To me, if he really wants the land, he can keep it. And
I don't know. I think he can. He's got Entomb, Exhume.
Okay, he has the Exhume. Sure, he can go ahead and keep it.
Now, the problem, of course, for him is that Rudy has the Snapcaster Mage, so he's going to be able to stay. If he stays back on defense rather than play True Name Nemesis here, Todd might be in a little bit of a pickle, which is what he does.
Well, he can Snapcaster the Swan Song.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so Todd's probably just going to keep waiting. until he has to make a move,
Yeah.
or until Rudy taps low. He's under no pressure here.
Yeah, that's the thing. He does have time. Rudy, that Deathrite Shaman that was in his hand that was the pressure, got eaten by the Elishnorn, so things aren't great for Todd, but Rudy doesn't have pressure yet. Eventually, if Rudy gets to, you know, say 5, 6 lands, he'll do something like tap 2 of them, make a Deathrite, maybe make a Stoneforge, maybe cast a Liliana, maybe just cast the Deathrite that he found off the Ponder. You know, but Todd has turns to work with. He has draws.
Liliana is really the card that he's scared of now that he has the Knot of this World for protection. So if Rudy doesn't tap out for Liliana here, if he instead taps out for, let's say, Snapcaster Mage on Brainstorm or True Name Nemesis, then Todd might have a window.
All right.
But Rudy's not going to fall for that. Instead, he's going to pass the turn, and Todd casts Entomb on the end step. See which fatty Todd elects to go for here.
It's probably just Griselbrand.
It's probably Griselbrand, just to draw the 7 cards, even if it gets removed immediately.
They said he's looking at Tidespout Tyrant. Now he's thinking it's between those two. So his cards are Griselbrand, Tidespout, Iona, Elishnorn, and we saw Ashen Rider. Of those, you know, Tidespout and Ashen Rider and Elishnorn, they're the reactionary ones. Iona and Griselbrand are the proactive ones.
And on an empty board against a 3-color deck that has Swords to Plowshares where you normally want to name blue, you've got to search for Griselbrand here, just searching and drawing 7 cards, especially because he's still above 20 life.
Well, especially, and also Todd has the Knot of this World in his hand. Griselbrand's the only one who isn't from here, so you don't want that card to be dead. And Exhume.
But unfortunately, Snapcaster Mage is going to counter the Exhume, unfortunately for Todd, I should say, fortunately for Rudy Briksza, and that spell is now Birds.
Just a bird, just a 2/2 bird. But as we've seen, that bird can be pretty relevant. It did a huge amount of damage last game.
Yep. Brad, again, keep doing that. I can't believe I keep doing that. You got to punch me.
I'm gonna let Todd, you know, be like, hey.
You got to tell Todd that I've been doing this.
Yeah.
They hang out together too much. Todd doesn't have as much of his graveyard graveyard spells. The fewer reanimates, fewer exhumes than he did before. He's more a show and tell based deck now, and so he's got less outs now to be able to try and dig out of this. So, but this bird can play defense for Todd until Liliana of the Veil enters the battlefield, and that's going to make the bird go away. And now Rudy's in very good shape. He also has a creeping tar pit to provide more offense. Todd is going to have to dig deeper into his deck and find an answer quick.
Land and Knot of this World certainly won't help. And the thing about the Reanimator strategy is that every time it goes for a win, it goes for a combo, it invests multiple cards. You know, we saw Show and Tell into Elishnorn, that's 2 cards. Entomb into Exhume, that's 2 cards. Every time Rudy answers what Todd does, it's a 2-for-1. And that's why we see Todd with a 2-card hand, Rudy with a hand with 3 to 4 cards and 2 creatures in play.
Yep, he's got the Snapcaster Mage, he's got True Name Nemesis ready to come down if he needs it, or a Creeping Tar Pit if he doesn't. The True Name Nemesis is going to come down here, and that's going to name Todd Anderson, not naming Brad Nelson.
Yes.
As we see, Snapcaster Mage gets into the red zone to drop Todd down to 17.
Well, he's found Reanimate off this Brainstorm. That's a pretty big one for him. He can reanimate Griselbrand. He has the Knot of this World. Griselbrand will draw cards. However, there's a Liliana with 2 counters.
Yep.
So it's not safe, but Todd he's found what he needs to. He's got a plan here.
Now, the other problem is this Elishnorn is now exiled, and there's a True Name Nemesis in play, and that's the main answer to the True Name.
Well, so here's the thing. If you reanimate Griselbrand, you take 7, right?
Yeah.
And if you need, then when he edicts you, you have to draw 7 cards, otherwise you didn't do anything, all right? Well, if you take 7 twice, Todd is at 3, and your opponent has a True Name Nemesis. So as cool as it is that you get to have Griselbrand, there's a slight problem in that it kills you.
Yep. So he's going to have to dig immediately to try to find Lotus Petals to be able to cast spells.
Right.
To be able to try to take care of what he sees on the board.
Right, and the question is it's not positive what he's drawing toward right away.
It's likely Pithing Needle if he brought them in.
Right, so if he brought in Pithing Needle, he can maybe find one of those. Other than that...
Aha, I see. So Todd has cast the little used any graveyard clause on Reanimate, targeted
Beautiful.
Deathrite Shaman from Rudy's graveyard, and put it onto the battlefield.
Not the usual reanimate
Last
target.
round, we saw Todd reanimate his opponent's Delver of Secrets twice.
Oh, wow. All right. So
And
Todd's a big
hoping
fan
for
of
some
this play.
flips to be able to race a Tombstalker.
Now he's 5-1. Did Todd win that game?
Todd did end up winning that game.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah, it was pretty
okay,
great.
Normally, that's a hefty. Wow. All right. Well
And
done.
so now Todd has his own Deathrite Shaman.
all right.
And in comes 8 damage at Todd. He's going to fall to 7 life here.
Less than a 2-turn clock, and Rudy is so unconcerned with Deathrite Shaman, he could have lost his Liliana to Edict it and make this attack a guaranteed 7. Doesn't even care, he pluses the Liliana.
Yep. Todd is hell-bent here, deciding how best to proceed. And he
Takes
has
it.
a Deathrite Shaman of his own that he then casts.
Yeah, he takes it, and then, it's replaced. Gristlebrand by Todd. So Rudy Briksza, 2-1, wins both board games against Todd Anderson. And I can't say I'm particularly surprised with how the matchup is. Rudy loses a quick game 1, adapts, and wins 2 long drawn-out post-board games.
Yeah, that's actually pretty much Esper's modus operandi, is that they lose game 1, have a sideboard well set up for pretty much everything, and then win game 2 and 3.
Yeah, and then
That's
sometimes
the